A night of fire ripped through a war machine's spine. Could a single bridge collapse topple an empire? The dawn of September 22 found Ukrainian forces pressing hard on the Kupiansk line. After months of blood-soaked combat, soldiers imagined the city's gates swinging open, the enemy fleeing toward Belgar. Russian commanders trembled. Losing the Starelo Bridge meant their armored spear would pierce deep into Russian soil. To stop that, they buried dozens of TM62 anti-tank mines beneath the Sol crossing on the Osil River, 21 kilometers from the front. Their grim plan: detonate the bridge if Kiev's machines arrived, sacrificing their own road to save the heartland. But a silent shark-type surveillance drone, circling 15,000 feet above, spotted the empty horizon. No air or ground guards lingered near the steel span. Was it a trap, or a careless slip? Lower-altitude scout drones slipped down like insects, revealing rows of gleaming mines cradling the bridge's pillars. Instead of blasting it instantly, Ukrainian leaders waited, craving a prize far richer than an empty crossing. They pressed the Kupiansk front, forcing the Russians to pour reinforcements over the fragile span. When the night grew black, the enemy convoy crept onto the bridge: 3 armored personnel carriers, a T-72 tank, 2 self-propelled howitzers valued in millions, humming with diesel heat. A lone drone slipped beneath the girders, its camera capturing the silent row of TM62 charges. With a tiny payload, it dove onto the explosives. An eruption of fire roared. A chain reaction that no missile of tens of thousands could match. The bridge exploded, sending metal and men skyward, the Osil River turning crimson with molten steel. From hundreds of kilometers away, another strike ignited the Aden oil station on the Stalikon pipeline, severing the fuel lifeline that feeds tanks and jets. With the bridge gone and oil halted, Russian generals awoke to a crippled army: no roads, no fuel, no hope. How long can a war survive when its veins are cut? The night's twin blows left the Kremlin scrambling, forced to divert precious air defenses to protect repair crews, exposing the front lines further. The question haunts every battlefield: when the weakest link shatters, does the whole chain finally snap? In the previous scene, Ukrainian surveillance drones discovered a critical oversight in Russian defenses. It became clear that a strategic bridge was almost unguarded, which could lead to decisive action against the enemy. Then, a moment of brilliance emerged. The Ukrainian operators examined their footage and located the hidden cache of gleaming mines meticulously planted under the bridge's pillars. While most military leaders might have prioritized immediate destruction, Ukrainian commanders executed a cunning strategy. They chose to bide their time and wait for a more lucrative opportunity. By increasing pressure on the Kiev front, they lured the Russian army deeper into their trap. September 22 arrived, a day that would mark a turning point. In the early hours, the Russian military convoy made its way toward the bridge, shrouded in darkness. It comprised 3 armored personnel carriers, a formidable T-72 tank, and 2 self-propelled howitzers, each vehicle a vital cog in the war machine. This convoy, valued in the millions, was now poised at the bridge, the very spot the Ukrainians had been longing for. As the operator skillfully piloted his drone, it was like navigating a video game. The screen displayed the target, a nest of anti-tank TM62 mines glimmering ominously. In a rapid descent, the drone unleashed its minuscule explosive payload on the mines. The result was catastrophic: an explosion erupted in a ferocious chain reaction, sending shockwaves through the area. The bridge and the Russian convoy ascended into the air in a fiery eruption, engulfing everything in its path. The waters of the Osil River turned crimson from the mangled remains of machinery, and the dreams of soldiers crumbled to ash. Ukraine had turned Russia's defense into its own offense, leveling a staggering blow to Putin's forces. This was more than a tactical victory, it was a transformative moment in what would become a relentless struggle for supremacy. The blazing inferno over the critical bridge in Belgar was just the beginning. Hundreds of kilometers northeast in the Bryansk region, Ukraine was executing a second, more discreetly lethal maneuver aimed at Russia's lifeblood: the Aden oil pumping station in Nitopavichi. This facility, part of the Stalikon pipeline linked to the infamous Dujba pipeline, was essential for transporting oil to Europe and supplying fuel to Russia's frontline troops. While this strike lacked the visual spectacle of the bridge explosion, its strategic implications were more profound. Fuel is the essence of a modern military force. Without it, tanks remain stationary, jets remain grounded, and logistics crumble. For months, Ukrainian forces had methodically targeted Russian oil refineries to stem the flow of this vital resource. However, this strike cut even deeper, directly severing one of the prime supply arteries. It delivered a dual blow to Russia, crippling both its military operation and export revenues simultaneously. This approach served as a far more impactful disruption than the discussions about sanctions the West had floated for so long. In this synchronized assault, Ukraine brilliantly showcased its ability to strangle Russia's economic lifeline not merely through financial means but through actual physical damage. The extent of Ukraine's coordinated attacks left Russian leaders grappling with an impossible challenge. They needed to allocate resources to repair both their military transport routes and energy supply lines simultaneously. This dilemma became a waking nightmare for a state already weary and drained from ongoing conflict. To safeguard repair teams and engineers, the Kremlin was forced to pull back essential air defense systems and frontline troops, further aggravating their vulnerabilities in battle. Hence, in that pivotal moment of September 22, 2025, the logistical framework supporting Putin's military efforts crumbled in a single night. The precision of Ukraine's operations, controlled from a centralized command across two separate fronts, could mark a revolutionary epoch in asymmetric warfare. As the dust settled from the twin assaults, the landscape of the battlefield was forever altered. But would Russia's military command realize the full extent of their impending doom, trapped between shattered logistics and fuel shortages? The answer lay within the shadows. Previously, the Russian supply network collapsed in one night when Ukrainian forces hit two critical targets. What if a tiny drone could make an entire army crumble? The night of September 22, 2025, began with a silent, high-altitude scout humming above the Osil River. Its eyes spotted a lone bridge at Starelo, the only crossing 21 kilometers from the Ukrainian front. Dozens of TM-62 anti-tank mines lay hidden beneath its steel ribs, waiting for a command that never came. Ukrainian commanders did not rush to blow the bridge. Instead, they let the Russian convoy crawl onto it, 3 armored personnel carriers, a T-72 tank, and 2 self-propelled howitzers, each a gleaming prize worth millions. The darkness was thick, the air smelled of cold metal and river moss. A low-flying reconnaissance drone slipped into the shadows of the bridge's understructure. Its camera caught the glitter of the mines. With a pulse of its tiny charge, the drone dove onto the explosive cluster. In an instant, a deafening roar split the night. The mines detonated in a cascading inferno, shattering the bridge and sending the convoy skyward in a fiery blossom. Red-hot fragments rained into the river, turning the water a blood-stained hue. While the bridge erupted, hundreds of kilometers away in Bryansk, a second strike ignited. The Aden oil pumping station on the Stalikon pipeline, part of the famed Dujba route, was hit. No dramatic explosion lit the sky, but the silent loss of fuel was even deadlier. Tanks stalled, jets sputtered, and the front lines grew cold. Russian generals awoke to a nightmare. Their northern forces were blind, stranded, and starving for fuel. Military blogs flooded with angry pleas: where is the ammo? Where is the gasoline? Reinforcements never arrive. Ukraine had chosen a new battlefield. Instead of matching tanks with tanks, it sliced the nerves that carried power to the front. By severing the bridge and the oil artery, it turned a mighty war machine into a crippled beast. The result? A historic fuel crisis sweeping across Russia, blackening the streets and choking the economy. The Kremlin now faces a paradox: to mend its roads and pipelines, it must pull air defense units from the front, exposing its troops even further. What will the Kremlin do when its lifeblood is choking, and the next strike could come from the shadows again? In a striking turn of events, Ukraine has boldly taken its fight to new depths, targeting Russia's energy infrastructure, which is the lifeblood of its military apparatus. As the echoes of tension intensified, the importance of oil and gas in shaping Russia's economic and political identity became painfully evident. For a quarter century, energy exports have filled the Kremlin's coffers, cushioning the regime's power and providing the stability that Putin promised his citizens. Ukraine's calculated assaults on this critical infrastructure are not merely financial blows, they undermine the very myth of Russia as an energy superpower. Interruptions in oil supplies and collapsing export revenues have left Moscow's diplomatic voice weakened. An attack on key segments of the Druzhba pipeline, which is vital for transporting oil to Europe, sparked panic in countries like Hungary and Slovakia, which still rely on Russian fuel. What happens to nations when their supply lines falter? The uncertainty sends ripples through economies, raising alarms and frustrations among leaders. On another front, the escalating risks in the Baltic and Black Sea regions caused shipping companies to hike their insurance premiums to astonishing levels. This, in turn, diminished Russian oil's competitiveness in the global market. Meanwhile, savvy buyers in Asia, notably China and India, seized this opportunity to press for even steeper discounts on oil they previously bought at reduced prices, exacerbating the Kremlin's troubles abroad. Back home, with a crumbling facade. The Kremlin was compelled to print more rubles to subsidize basic necessities like gasoline, ultimately stoking inflation. The situation spiraled into an economic deadlock, portending losses both nationally and internationally. In response, the Kremlin scrambled to extinguish this multifaceted crisis. They imposed temporary restrictions on gasoline and diesel exports to ensure sufficient supply for domestic use. But could these measures truly stem the tide of disaster, or was it too late? As panic gripped the state, the weight of these decisive actions lay heavily on the shoulders of the Kremlin. Would history remember this as a final moment of desperation, or a turning point for Russia's very survival? Imagine the entire foundation of a nation crumbling overnight, setting the stage for chaos. On the morning of September 22, 2025, a seismic shift unfolded on the battlefield of Ukraine. After months of harsh confrontation, Ukrainian forces readied themselves for a decisive strike aimed at liberating Kupiansk, a vital city teetering on the brink of Russian control. The stakes soared as the specter of Ukrainian troops pushing across the border into Russia loomed large, igniting panic within the Russian military hierarchy. Their desperate decision? To create a defensive wall at one critical juncture, the bridge at Starelo over the Osil River, a mere 21 kilometers from Ukraine. This wasn't just any crossing, this bridge served as the lifeblood for Russian forces, the sole conduit for troops and supplies heading towards the volatile front lines. The generals lived in terror, imagining fast-approaching Ukrainian tanks racing through the bridge, threatening their very command. To thwart this looming disaster, they laid down a deadly trap, dozens of TM-62 anti-tank mines beneath the bridge, primed for a catastrophic response. The expectation was set, should the Ukrainians advance, they would pay the ultimate price, along with the bridge itself. However, they underestimated the relentless ingenuity of their adversaries. On that pivotal morning, as if guided by fate, a Ukrainian long-range drone ascended high above the strategic territory, far from the reach of air defenses. It discovered a troubling sight, the bridge, oddly defenseless. Where were the barriers? Where were the defenses? Could this be a mistake or a calculated ambush? Responding swiftly, reconnaissance drones were dispatched to reconnoiter the area and soon identified the glint of the mines below. As the tension mounted, Ukrainian strategists devised a cunning plan. Rather than strike immediately, they bided their time, setting an enticing bait for the Russian forces. With pressure mounting on the Kharkiv front, Russian commanders felt the urgent need for reinforcements from Belgorod, choosing the very bridge they believed would protect them. On the fateful morning of September 22, while darkness still enveloped the area, a convoy of Russian armored vehicles entered the bridge, unknowing of the disaster that awaited. A T-72 tank, self-propelled howitzers, and personnel carriers, all worth millions, stood vulnerable at this critical juncture. The moment had come. The operator guided his drone with precision, placing it over the hidden mines. Seconds later, chaos erupted. An explosive chain reaction surged through the bridge and up into the sky, consuming everything in its fiery grasp. The Osil River was stained with remnants of destruction as the aspirations of the Russian convoy went up in flames. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away in Bryansk Oblast, another blow was swiftly planned. The target was a key oil pumping station, part of the strategic pipeline that fed the Russian war machine and secured fuel supplies for frontline troops. Ukraine had already disrupted Russia's oil refineries, and now they aimed to cut down another essential artery. This attack, while perhaps less visually spectacular, mounted a significant economic strike, choking the lifeblood sustaining Russia's military operations. Fuel is not just a necessity, it is the very heartbeat of military effectiveness. And as Ukrainian forces began severing these vital channels, the echoes of a failing energy sector became apparent. The heart of Russia's war effort was at risk, compromising both military operations and the economy. As a result, the Kremlin, caught in a dilemma of unprecedented proportions, issued panic measures, but these were mere band-aids on a severed artery. Restrictions emerged, gas stations became hotspots of frustration, and prices spiraled as citizens prepared for the worst. Simultaneously, as air defenses became stretched thin due to the dire need to protect crucial infrastructures, the domestic situation grew more dire. It was a perfect storm. The strategic paralysis rippled across the nation, debilitating transportation, agriculture, and retail. What happens when a nation birthed from energy confronts its own vulnerabilities? The answer lies in the stark reality that the Russian regime's narrative of invincibility began crumbling under the relentless Ukrainian offensive, targeting not just military targets, but the entire economic backbone of the country. As both the past and present collided, uncertainty seeped into every corner of Russian society. What did the future hold for a nation grappling with such disarray? This gripping scenario illustrates how warfare has transformed into a multifaceted struggle, where the impact is felt far beyond the battlefield. The chess game of conflict in modern times is no longer defined merely by troop movements or artillery fire, but by cutting veins deep within an opponent's fabric. As tension rises and uncertainty lingers, the question remains, how will Russia adapt in a world where vulnerability can be its own worst enemy? A night of fire changed everything. How could a single bridge become a weapon against its own builders? The story began on the dawn of September 22, 2025, when Russian troops gathered at the lone crossing over the Osul River, only 21 kilometers from the Ukrainian line. Dozens of remote detonated TM62 anti-tank mines lay beneath the steel spans, waiting for the enemy to charge. Ukrainian eyes in the sky spotted the silent trap. A low-flying reconnaissance drone revealed gleaming charges hidden under the bridge's pillars. Instead of blasting the crossing immediately, Ukrainian commanders let the Russians march in, confident that the convoy would be priceless. 3 armored personnel carriers, a T-7 tank and 2 self-propelled howitzers crept onto the structure under cover of darkness. A small strike drone slipped beneath the arches, its camera catching the glitter of the mines. A tiny explosive payload struck the pile of TM62s, igniting a chain reaction so fierce that the bridge erupted, swallowing the convoy in a fireball that painted the river red. At the same moment, hundreds of kilometers away, a Ukrainian missile pierced the Aden oil pumping station on the Stalikon pipeline, cutting the lifeblood of Russia's frontline fuel supply. The twin blows left the Kremlin scrambling to mend a shattered bridge and a crippled oil artery at once. What would a nation do when its own defenses become weapons against it? The previous strike forced Russia into a desperate scramble. What happens when a country's logistics collapse in a single night? The answer unfolded across the vast Russian landscape as the echo of exploding steel turned into a silent, grinding paralysis. Fuel vanished from pumps, and the daily rhythm of life stuttered. Transportation, farms and grocery shelves were the first to feel the strain. Households, unsure when the next barrel would arrive, hoarded gasoline in garages, turning neighborhoods into tinderboxes. Winter's chill brought a deeper dread, the fear of no heat for a home. Credit lines tightened, budgets shrank, and families cut spending, starving the economy of demand. Companies, hit by soaring logistics costs, froze new projects and delayed supplier payments, spiraling into cash scarcity. The state budget, robbed of oil export revenue, slashed funding for health, schools and roads, preserving only defense outlays. Without fuel, garbage trucks stalled, buses ran sparingly, and ambulances struggled to reach patients. A driver waiting in an endless line felt more than inconvenience. His frustration became a measured challenge to a regime that had long declared, "We are an oil nation." When the gasoline disappears, the nation's pulse slows. How far will the growing anger push ordinary Russians toward the brink? From the battlefield to the home front, a deeper disease spread. Can a war cripple a country's very soul as efficiently as any artillery shell? The crisis seeped into every fiber of Russian life, like an insidious cancer. Credit markets choked, and budgets teetered on the edge of collapse. Families, unable to predict their next fuel delivery, tightened belts. Shrinking consumer demand and dimming economic growth. Enterprises, besieged by rising energy costs, halted investments and postponed supplier payments, creating a feedback loop of uncertainty. The Treasury, drained by falling oil royalties and costly domestic subsidies, was forced to carve cuts into health, education and infrastructure while protecting the military machine. Fuel shortages crippled public services, garbage went uncollected, buses ran on empty schedules, and school buses failed to reach distant villages. Each missed bus, each uncollected bin, each cold classroom fanned the flames of resentment in a society already strained by war. The invisible fuel that once flowed unnoticed now stood as a stark, unyielding barometer of state competence. When citizens, raised on slogans of oil supremacy, stared at empty pumps, the legitimacy of the regime trembled. Will this hidden, systematic targeting of the nation's arteries finally break the Kremlin's hold,
or will it forge a new resolve in the heart of the empire?
Earlier we saw how the dread of an empty fuel tank sparked panic, speculation, and a growing mistrust of the state's promises.
The fear of not finding gasoline turned into a deeper terror. What if the house could not be warmed when winter arrived? What if the very bridge the Russian generals built to shield their troops became the most devastating weapon against them?
On September 22, a Ukrainian drone slipped beneath the Starelo crossing, its tiny camera revealing rows of gleaming anti-tank mines hidden beneath the concrete arches. Instead of blowing the bridge outright, Ukrainian commanders waited, letting the Russian convoy, 3 armored personnel carriers, a T-72 tank and 2 self-propelled howitzers, creep onto the narrow span. The air was thick with the metallic scent of oil, the faint hum of engines, the distant murmur of the Osil River. When the drone released its modest charge, the mines detonated in a roaring chain reaction. The bridge erupted in a ball of fire, the convoy shredded, metal screaming as it fell. Shards of steel rained into the river, turning its water a fiery scarlet.
In that instant, Russia's logistical spine snapped, its own explosives turned into an unthinkable defeat. But the night's carnage did not end there.
Hundreds of kilometers away, a second strike hit the Aden oil pumping station on the Stalikon pipeline, a crucial artery feeding fuel to frontline units and to Europe. The explosion sent plumes of black smoke skyward, the smell of burning hydrocarbons drifting over the winter-brittle fields. Fuel, the lifeblood of any modern army, suddenly stalled.
Tanks sputtered, jets fell silent, and supply trucks turned back empty-handed. How could a single night cripple a war machine built on endless ammunition and endless oil? The Kremlin now faces a nightmare. Repair crews must secure both a shattered bridge and a crippled pipeline, pulling precious air defense systems from the front lines. Every wrench turn and every bolt tightened is heard like a ticking clock, each echo reminding soldiers and civilians alike that the war's engines are grinding to a halt. The attacks in Belgrade and Bryansk were only the opening moves of a ruthless new doctrine: target the weakest links that bind the enemy's strength. By severing the arteries that carry fuel and supplies, Ukraine has turned Russia's own infrastructure against it, exposing the fragile reality beneath the Kremlin's grand narrative of revival. What will the Russian leadership do as their transport routes lie in ruin and their energy veins bleed? The answer hangs in the cold night air, waiting to be written by the next decisive strike. Imagine a city where the roar of a refinery fire fades into a distant echo, where the fierce blaze that once lit the night sky is replaced by endless queues that snake like black rivers beneath a cold, gray dawn. Citizens stand for 8 relentless hours, only to hear the cruel news: 2 liters of gasoline will sustain their families for an entire day. How can a single spark ignite a cascade of panic that reaches every doorstep, turning ordinary streets into arenas of desperation? The answer lies not in distant politics but in the acrid smell of burnt oil hanging in the night air, the bitter chill of empty tanks, and the shivering hands of people clutching the last drops of hope. Summary of the previous moment: the pressure in Russia follows a familiar rhythm: first denial, then complaint, growing resentment, and finally raw anger. Kremlin edicts can slow each stage, but they cannot erase the inevitable march forward. A refinery fire is more than a flicker on a television screen, it becomes a line of people waiting in the cold, the sound of tires grinding on frozen pavement, the metallic taste of fear in the throat. After an 8-hour wait, the queue finally moves, and each driver learns they will receive only 2 liters of fuel per day. The mind-numbing statistic turns personal as the engine sputters, the smell of gasoline turns into ash, and the silence of a stalled car speaks louder than any artillery. A power outage is just a number on a report until the radiator's hum stops, the apartment grows icy, and the breath of the occupants forms ghostly clouds. As more families feel the bite of darkness and the sting of cold metal, the social equation shifts. The question changes from "do we support the state's goals?" to a harsher whisper: why is my life deteriorating each day, and who bears responsibility? When the convenient blame of the West no longer fits, eyes turn inward, landing on a single, imposing silhouette: the Kremlin. What will happen when ordinary citizens, once shielded by propaganda, finally confront the emptiness behind the slogans? The night is still, the river of fuel has run dry, and a new, silent revolt begins to stir.